more easy than last week.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to read a lot of the stuff?
Yeah.
No.
Last week I just read 2 books. This week I can read like just less one reading. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry.
Sorry, say that again.
Yeah. Last week I just read 2 books, and this week I can read 4 books like this. So I think it's easy for this week reading.
Okay, that's really good to hear.
Demetra, I'm going to be right back, okay?
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to ask people to tell me if you had too many unknown words in the texts. One of your colleagues already said that it was easier than last week, so that's really good to hear. Do you think that they could be read by a wider audience, or do you think that they're pretty academic, the texts? Feel free to jump in. No right or wrong answers. This is not a quiz, don't worry. It's just a conversation.
Maybe it's for the wide audience because it has many examples for the audience to accept this content.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's great. Like the Johannesburg text by Malik Simone, he gives a lot of examples, right? So it's easier to understand something when we give examples. So what I would like you to do is to kind of try to see how these authors write, how they present their topic, how they give their introduction. So what do they say in the introduction? So usually they start by saying what's going to follow, right? They start by saying, what is this about? What is this chapter or this paper about? They talk about their methods. So how they did their research, what kind of approach they used to their research. Very often they'll say if they did interviews or if they did qualitative or quantitative research. This is something that we usually find in peer review articles more than book chapters. And this is also something that's very important for your essays and your dissertations as well, that you begin your essay or your dissertation by explaining what's going to follow. You kind of prepare your reader. Don't take it as a novel sort of say where you want to leave mystery and you want the reader to kind of be surprised. Although there is an element of surprise, you shouldn't say everything from the beginning. But as a research piece, you should be preparing your reader what is to follow, for them to know what is to follow. Okay. Iwa, did you want to say something as an intro?
To the subject or in lines of intro themselves?
Anything.
Is that really loud? Is the
No.
sound okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the introduction is really important because it sets the scene, and I mean, first of all, when I'm reading kind of research kind of papers and stuff, the introduction would always be like the most important thing to make sure that I'm looking kind of at the right thing, that I get a kind of idea of the author's position or standpoint from the outset. So I think it's a very, as Demetra has said, a very important part of the anatomy of of a piece.
Yeah. So say that we take an example here and we go to Fetishizing the Modern City by Maria Kaika and Eric Swingadow. Funnily enough, both Eric Swingadow and Maria Kaika used to be scholars, professors at the University of Manchester in the geography department. Maria Kaika is a scholar in urban studies, but she's also a former architect, trained as an architect. So you'll see that there is a spatial aspect to her writing. And that's something that I would say differentiates us from other disciplines. That even though our concerns might align with urban geography, anthropology, sociology, different types of urban studies, subfields of urban studies, what differentiates our research is the spatial aspect, which I would say is, in a lot of topics hasn't been explored as much. So it's useful to bring this architectural, spatial aspect to any kind of research that we do. And that way kind of progress knowledge in our field. So at the beginning of so why am I saying this? So it's what's useful when you're reading a text, a book, or an article. You might want to Google the authors, see who they are, just a really quick Google search. You don't have to spend a lot of time doing that. But just to see who they are, what discipline they come from, what is their background. And it's, the texts that we give out are usually popular texts, so you won't have a lot of trouble doing that. But it's really useful to see where are these scholars coming from? What is their background? Where are they located? Are they UK scholars, US scholars? Are they Southeast Asian scholars? Are they kind of more internationally based? So it kind of gives you an idea where they're coming from.
I mean, like kind of buildings, all writing, all kind of production lives in context, right? So that quick Google search that allows you to find out their background, allows you to find out where they're based, gives you a setting for their work, also kind of in time. That's why people always ask, oh, when was it written? Because all these things are very important when you are trying to, well, maybe not critique, but evaluate the positions and points being put across in prose.
And also the time of writing, right? So as research progresses and times change, we find movements, we find theoretical alignments being grouped together and kind of developing alongside one each other. So you'll notice that someone writing in the 90s has a different style of writing than someone writing nowadays. And the theories that they quote, things that they're inspired by are quite different as well. So think about the sort of social context, socio-political context of the time within which they are writing. I want to go to the introduction of Maria Kaika and Eric Swingadow really quickly, and have a look at what they call technological networks. What do they understand as infrastructure? Because all of these readings are about urban systems and infrastructures, right? So, and every author gives a different point of view. Of course, there are similarities. There's a lot of similarities along the texts, the 4 texts that we explored this week. But there's also nuances in terms of how they approach the topic.
Do we know how many people have read this text?
Yes, how many people have managed to read I see nods. Okay.
Yeah, I have read this article.
What did you think of it?
Um, I think they have different meaning uh, in different century, and uh, technology network, they put nature to the city. Uh, uh, this article give an example is water. Uh, water through the technology network like uh, like what how to say the water station. They put the water into the city. So the water station means the technology network. There are a lot of nature things can also be turned to the city, like gas, water, or other nature resource. They also can use the technology network into the city.
Does anybody else have a take on that before we move to the introduction? I just realized I interrupted you again, Demetra. Sorry.
No, no, that's fine. Feel free. At some point I'll run out of ideas and
Hi.
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 So they talk more about commodification of natural resources and more about water. So, how it got developed and how the networks were first above the ground and then they just went under it. And in the end, they speak about that hell needs a heaven to survive. But we should look more about how can we change the lifestyle, or I don't know how to make the hell better.
Okay. Anyone else? So does everyone know what commodification means? Have you come across it before? Does
No?
it make sense when you translate it? So your colleague mentioned the use of water, right, for city infrastructure, and how that water becomes transferred through pipes and technology into the city. So the authors talk about this transformation of water as something that makes that water invisible, as something that makes us forget that it is a part of nature, because it becomes part of this technological system, part of this infrastructure. And they also talk about water as something that is being commodified. So can you guess what that means?
It's more like adding monetary terms to a product.
Yeah, yeah. So it's something that becomes monetized, something that
Yes.
has a money value,
Yep.
right? And they
And and
go ahead.
very kind of sorry, and very kind of specifically in, I don't know, are there commodities in social, well, probably in socialist regimes, but in communism. There probably isn't, or it's thought about in a different way. It's very much about the association of monetary value to a specific entity. I've just realized it's really vague, and that's exactly what Demetra just said before. So ignore me.
No, that's another way of putting it, actually. So I want you to think about this. How does something gain monetary value? How is something a product? Whether that's water, electricity, what they call commodity in this article, or a different particular product, how does it get its value, its monetary value? So who gets to say how much money it costs? And how do they calculate that?
When the demand of any certain product rises, the price automatically is decided to be growing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And to be honest, humans can monetize anything in this world.
said like a true cynic there. Wow.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Good old fashioned Adam Smith, huh?
Oh, yeah, of economics.
I think I'm very cynical myself, so I would totally agree with that statement.
Yeah.
I was just there. I was about to go, oh no, I'm not that cynical. I do believe that in kind of markets and um, economics sorting itself out. And then I took a pause and I was like, oh wait, no, you don't actually believe that. So
Yeah, and very often the value of certain commodities has nothing to do with demand and supply. Very often it's a kind of a Mickey Mouse money scheme where the value it gains has to do with how could I call it, estimates in a way. So even the global market goes up and down based on how people estimate that it will go up and down. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation where if you have predictions that if you suddenly get predictions that the market will go down, then people start selling and it actually goes down. So it's kind of like what came first? So a lot of commodities actually today, they're not, their monetary value is based on a huge number of factors. It has to do with the way that they are produced, right? The kind of technologies that are needed for them to be produced. It has to do with who owns that production. So is it state owned? For example, when it comes to infrastructures, is the water company that provides the water, is it state owned company? Is it a private public partnership? So you have different forms of this ownership, right? So it can be purely private, it can be public-private partnership, where the government has some kind of a control over the water production and the water distribution, but a private company owns the technology, for example, and the patent. Or you have state-owned and controlled production and distribution. So it very much depends on who owns it, right? Who owns this production and distribution, and also whether it is a monopoly or not. So to give you an example, until 2021 or until 2022, actually, electricity production in my home country, Cyprus, is a public-private partnership, and there is only one company that produces electricity and has a monopoly over the entire island. This means that they can raise prices as much as they want, and there's very little government control for private corporations. So at the moment, people living in Cyprus can no longer afford their electricity because they get $700 bills every month for one family, which is absolutely insane. So, you know, the ownership really kind of drives who gets to have electricity, who gets to have access to electricity.
Another example of kind of a big monopoly, maybe, which is maybe kind of in the forefront of your minds, is the kind of Facebook thing in which their servers were down last week or 2 weeks ago. Um, whereas, sure, that's not kind of an explicit monopoly on the internet, but when you have certain populations in the world that rely on Facebook or rely on WhatsApp for their communication, then suddenly it becomes an implicit kind of monopoly. So yeah, that's not a natural resource, but maybe an example worth mentioning in this instance.
Absolutely. Since, social media are now a very key part of global infrastructure, right? So I'm wondering, can anyone give me an example of an infrastructure network from their home country or their hometown, and maybe tell us if it's privately owned, if it's publicly owned, if it's expensive, if people have any problems accessing that service. It could be water, it could be electricity, it could be the internet, it could be any other type of infrastructure network that you think is worth mentioning.
Hi. Yeah, I would like to mention about the roads and sanitization. So, roads in very village areas, which are like not developed at all. So the roads weren't available, and roads uh, what do I say, government owned. So government puts all the money to build the roads. But now they are more diverted towards the rural areas to connect them to the city areas so that people don't migrate a lot. The transport, uh, it's still in a process of connecting the remote areas to the city areas. The transport time must be more, but they're still trying to figure out something. And about the sanitization, uh, people were not there were no access to toilets and in India, like a decade ago. But now you can see there are toilets in each and every house in remotest part of area, remotest part of any area. So that's a big development according to me.
In fact, I think there's a researcher and designer that works specifically on that issue in India, I think, called Julia King. And when she kind of maps out that infrastructure and those networks in the areas in which she's working, you start to see how vast and expansive that is. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Does anybody else have an example they want to share with the group?
We're going to start calling out names soon.
Hello. Hi. In our country, the electricity and the water price all controlled by government, but they are separate. For example, if this building was used to living, the price for the water or electricity will low. But if this building for the business, the price will higher than more than the living building. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. That's really interesting. I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also aware that in China, the government owns the land. Is that correct?
Yeah, government owns them.
Okay, okay, and then someone can lease the land or to build on it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So another two researchers who work on sanitation are actually based in our university, the University of Manchester. So my colleague Purva, and I forget her last name, I'll look it up, I'll share her profile. Purva works on sanitation in India. She used to work on in an NGO that mapped toilet provision. And now I'm forgetting exactly which city she was based in, but her work is really good. So I'll see her. I'll check her profile and I'll share it with you. And also assistant professor Deliana Yusufova works on sanitation in China. So these are two scholars in our university who work on sanitation and infrastructure issues. And their research is quite interesting and worth having a look at.
Shall we look at some of the other writing? Did everybody get yes? No, maybe? Unless there's someone that's wanting to jump out and exclaim or make declarations on current writing.
Hi. I like to speak about the water supply. So when I came here, it was very surprising for me that they have only one tap. Like you drink and you use the domestic use and drinking purpose is the same tap. So apparently we have two different taps and two different tanks. The using water is used mostly like what we say filtered on the site or extracted from the ground or wells, and the drinking water is comes from the government supply. So it was very surprising for me that they had only one, and I actually confirmed by calling the reception that is this, are you sure? Are you sure, can I drink this? Yeah.
Yeah, it's often also what was also kind of shocking for me as a kind of culture shock was people washing dishes and keeping the water running.
No.
And I come from a country where we had water cuts every 2 days, and we had to shower with water bottles. You know, I got stuck in the shower with a head full of shampoo. So, you know, for me, it was like, oh my God, stop wasting water. So I can totally see where you're coming from.
Does anybody else have examples like that of natural resources in the country that you now live in, and how they're different from where you lived before or previously? Is there anything anybody would like to say? Any thoughts, any comments? What about you, Hang Fan?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Actually, I was born in China, and I like to say something about the water resources in China. In the early days, the water resources in China was divided into two types, and one is the water you can drink, and it was provided by the company, and it can deliver the waters in bottles to your home. And the other type of water is you can use it from the tap, uh, and but nowadays in China, a few people book the water, uh, the drinking water, and instead nowadays uh, they choose to boiling the water from tap, and instead of booking the drinking water from the company. So I think uh, it's a different way to uh, it's a different way to uh, of the water using in the nowadays in China. Yeah.
Do people agree with that, or do they have any more comments to say about water in China?
Uh, Maybe they think they boil the water from tap is more uh, convenient than they collect the water from the drinking water company. Yeah. So more and more people choose to buy the kettles or boiling the water instead of buying the water from the drinking water company. Yeah.
I guess it's also more expensive to buy the water from the water company,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The way from boiling water is more cheap. Yeah, it's cheaper.
Right. But it also takes time. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like a situation of, you know, who has kind of the money to buy the ready drinking water and who has to boil it. So we have kind of issues of quality and access there as well. That's a really, really good example. Thank you.
Okay.
There's one point in the text, in the first text, that I wanted to come back to. Again, on the first page, last paragraph. Kaika and Swingadao, they refer to Deleuze and Guattari, two 20th century philosophers, who say that the city is a circulatory conduit, a flux that is always material but never fixed. So that's another kind of characteristic of infrastructure systems that many scholars agree on, that infrastructural flows are characteristic to how we understand infrastructures and how we understand their function, their production, and their distribution. So it's something that's always on the move. And we can understand through that, we can also understand the city as such, as always being on the move, as something always moving from A to B, whether that is people, materials, resources, natural systems like water. And this helps us to kind of redefine how we research things and how we analyze the city, right? So if we try to analyze it in terms of movement, then that automatically changes our understanding of how a city works. And I think for us architects and designers, it's a lot easier to do that because we're used to drawing maps, we're used to drawing plans, and we're used to drawing things that are in process, right? So even when we're drawing, we start kind of with a draft, we start with a few lines, then we go on to kind of a more complete design, then we go on to technical detailing, and it's a processual work in a way. It's a processual job, and I think that helps us, taking that into account, helps us understand how cities work as well, right? So it's always something that is in the process of making. And even when infrastructures are sort of quote unquote complete, there's still movement in them, and that movement can also be considered as material movement that gets older as time goes by, that deteriorates. So that movement also has to do with material that ages in a way and needs maintenance every so often. So all of these things, taking all of these things into account, allows us to theorize the city in a very different way, rather than seeing sort of static pictures of buildings and trying to understand them, right? Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? I almost want to do a little exercise here that maybe it'll help us move the conversation forward. So if you were to draw a diagram of how water gets to your apartment, and it doesn't have to be in Manchester, it could be in your hometown, right? So I want you to think about, and you can take 20 minutes to do that. So you can Google search whatever you don't know. But I want you to take about 20 minutes to do that. And I would like you to draw a little diagram that shows where the water comes from. And think of a few things. So think of technology, the materials for that technology. Who owns that technology? So let me write it down. Let me write it down in the text so you don't forget about it. So let's see. Sorry, my Teams is ridiculously slow today. So where water comes from. How does it get to your apartment? And things to consider are, let's start from the water source. Technology, materials for that technology, ownership. And that ownership can be ownership of land that the water passes through. It can be on ownership of the technology, ownership of the company that provides the technology. And then we have number 4, I would say, regulating bodies. So is it the government? Is it private, etc.? And then number 5, I would say the users and whether or not they have access and what kind of access. Iwa, do you have any other ideas what they can add to that diagram?
I think that's pretty comprehensive. And what should we say?
So should we say quarter past? Let's say quarter past. Okay. So we'll see you back here at 3:15. Make a sketch. Don't worry about the diagrams being pretty. We want you to unfold the network. We're going to call this unfolding the network.
That's a great name.
Cool. See you in a bit. Welcome back, everybody. Who wants to share their network sketch? And you can take a photo of it and put it in the chat, or you can hold it up.
Hold it up.
Yeah, I think it's easier if you just, hold it up and tell us a little bit about what you found or what you couldn't find. That's also interesting.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
I draw acute diagram of the water system of the water system in China. So first of all, the water comes from the rivers, lakes, and it was called the raw water. And people collect the raw water, collect them together to the raw water tank, yeah, like a big bottle. And then
And
the
is that by a company, or is that by the government?
by the government, by the company, and the company was organized by the government. Yeah, it was controlled by the government. Yeah, and the water company put the raw water in the raw water tank, and then the raw water tank and the water through the pump. Yeah, the this installation called pump, and then they use the fine sand filter and activated carbon. Yeah, they use something like this uh, to change the raw water to the water we can use in our daily life, and the water will become and after they the water change, they will put the water to the water position, and the water position are in the cities or in the residential buildings, and it was all over the cities. Yeah. Mm. And then the water position and the water from the water position gets through the water pipe to the residential buildings and underground, and then the water can get to the every floor to accommodation and to every room, so people can use the water in their daily lives. Yeah, it's something just like this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I want to ask your colleagues, what do you think is missing, or what do you think can be added to this diagram?
Mm.
Think of um, the points that I wrote down in the chat before we started the exercise.
Yeah, let me have a look. Or maybe the ownership. Yeah. And the users. Yeah. Maybe who can use the water, and yeah. And the regulating body, government. The raw water and the water system was uh, was owned by the government, but the users can pay fees to use the waters, and the more they use the water every month, and the more they will pay. Yeah, like buy the water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So people, we can add people to the diagram, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And their role basically in this circular motion that you identified. So it would be interesting at different points of your diagram to kind of make little arrows and add people or companies or governments or anyone who's kind of responsible for the different parts of this process that you identified.
Yeah.
Great. Does anyone have any comments? Anything else that you would like to add to the diagram? Anything that you would have done maybe differently?
Hi, Demetra. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Mm, So how can I share my iPad screen?
So there's a
Oh yeah.
3 dots at the top.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, I did it. Actually, I did a little diagram. So my hometown is in Lanzhou City, northwest of China, and our little city is famous for its Yellow River, which is considered as the mother river in China. So the whole city is actually was actually built by the river, and because of the river, the city has a very characteristic label. So our lives, daily lives, is all around the river. So actually, uh, the water from the Yellow River goes into the water treatment plant and do some sedimentation with some chemical agent, and also some of the water flow into the reservoir and through the dam, so that creating some electricity to for people to use, and then the water pipe was used for the transportation of the water, so that everybody can use it from the water tap from in our home. Yeah, that's what I did, and the pictures here is something I did before in my portfolio. It shows the technology in China nowadays about the treatment of the rings. So you can see that. That's it.
And do you want to talk more widely about the ownership of the different components in your diagram?
I'm sorry,
Like
I didn't hear you.
who owns the water treatment plant? Who owns the dam?
Actually, it's all owned by the government, so that we cannot control the water price. Like, yeah.
Okay,
Okay, great.
thank you.
I like that you included two different types of resources because you have electricity from the
Mhm.
dam as well, right? So you have a kind of a combination of two different types of infrastructures in this diagram, which I like. But yes, definitely, I would include ownership. I would include the users. And when we say users, it's important to think about different types of users. Um, as your colleague gave us an example before, people who can afford to buy water, to boil their water, water. So you have different types of users in that sense. Um, yeah, thank you so much. Does anyone have any comments on the diagram?
Does anybody have their own diagram that they want to share?
Yeah, hi. I made kind of a flow chart which is more with text and less graphics.
That's okay.
Uh, should I share my screen?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please do.
Yes. Is it seen? Is it seen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. So I chose my own city. It is Pune, near Mumbai. The main source of water is from the river Mutha, and there are four dams built on it, which I've listed here, and they are owned by the state government. And the local government has to pay some amount to use the water. The local government has to pay the state government to like use the water. The total capacity of these dams is 30 TMC. TMC is 1,000 million cubic feet. So 1 TMC is 2,831 million liters. So it's into 30. That is the capacity of those dams. Then the water goes to water purification plants. Again, in Pune, there's in Parvati, there's a specific area, and it purifies around 535 million liters per day. So again, it is all owned by the local municipal corporation. Local municipal corporation pays amount to the state government uh, for the water. Next, it is supplied to the city via closed conduits with 70% of the water, and it goes to the urban areas. Rest 30% through canals, it is supplied to the rural areas. And I made a typical underground water tank section to show what I meant before about having the two sections in water tank and two taps. So the main supply, it fills up the domestic water supply, water part section first, and then goes to the drinking one. And in some areas, they have the third section, which is reserved for the emergencies. And then from this, the water goes to overhead tanks and then to the houses. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything to add? Any comments? Any observations? Jaizu, have you got any? Yeah, hi. Have you got any? Did you draw a diagram? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I've joined my diagram. Uh, Let me try how to share my screen. Maybe I send my picture on the box. Mm. Sorry, I don't know how to do it. Maybe I just use this.
Take your time. There is another one in here that I think we missed. Liu's diagram.
Yes. At the photo I sent to the chapel is for me.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we talk about that very quickly whilst Jai, so you put it in. You find out a way to send it to us.
Okay, I share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yep.
I think the water come from maybe from rain and the water and from rest. So we can see the photo in the screen. The water come from the forest and river, and then come to the reservoir, and then come to fractures to make it cleaner, and then could put it to the apartment and for people using. And I think I want to share another thing about the water collection. This digital is I made for before. I think we can collect some waters in a building and to using to we can make a plan in the building facades and collect the water on the roof, and then the water can use for the plants on the facade, and the water and in the ground they have a pools for the fish to swim in the water, and this cycle system uh, for the for the fish and for the plant and for people. I think we can use the water to make a system on the facade, and this is I want to share about I designed it before, and it's just a concept. And
Okay, thank you. That's
Thank
very,
you.
very detailed and very technical. And I think, again, we're missing the people. So that would be interesting to see, especially like in the building diagram. It would be interesting to see the different companies that come together to create that building, right? In addition to kind of ownership, it would be useful, I think, to think about who is able financially and technologically to put together that system that you're talking about. So if in China land ownership is sort of it's government based, then who has what kind of companies have the capacity, the financial and political capacity to make these buildings, to make technologically advanced buildings. And I'm guessing it's not every company, every construction company. They would require a certain set of skills, expertise, materials to put that together. And it would also be interesting to think about where the materials for that come from. Are they produced in China? Are they produced, if they are produced in China, are they produced in different cities and different regions of China and then transported across? Or are they imported from other countries? So you kind of, so that system can become part of a global network.
Jai, did you send it? the picture?
Yes.
Cool.
Okay. Oh my god. My laptop need me to log out the Teams, then log in, then I can share my screen.
Did you do the diagram on your computer?
No, my iPad.
Oh, your iPad. Can you
Yeah.
Oh
try
yeah.
to hold up your
Just
iPad like this?
Maybe I need. Oh, I think it's not very. Let me try. Well, I opened the. Okay. Maybe it's not very clearly. My city is in the south of China. My city is we have three rivers: the Poor River, the East River, and the West River. So these river supply their water to the city. We use the water tower to bond the river, bond the water to the factory. We have Guangzhou government, Guangzhou Water Supply Company, which is owned by the Guangzhou government. Then he will use this fall of the process to pure and clean the water. Then they use the pipe, yeah, transfer the water to the city. Then the residents can use the river, can use the water.
And if you were to add the element or the dimension of people into that process, who, for example, who owns the Guangzhou Water Company?
Guangzhou government.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. So local government. So then does the local, if you know, I mean, I'm not expecting you to know this information, but so does the local government then have to answer to the central government in terms of how they manage the water, in terms of the prices, for example?
Yeah, I think our country have a same standard. So the Guangzhou government will organized by the central government.
Okay, okay, that's interesting.
Is everybody clear on what we mean, what we could mean by infrastructure? Does anybody have any questions on infrastructure? Has anybody that's read all of the readings was surprised about the expanse of what we understand as infrastructure? Because I think some of the, well, at least one of the readings this week didn't specifically talk about physical infrastructure. Was anybody surprised by that? Does anybody want to go through some of the questions that they posted on Moodle? Thank you.
Do you agree that people count as infrastructure? You can write it in the chat if you prefer. There's a really nice statement in the Johannesburg paper, or I think this is a chapter actually from the book. Abdulmalik Simone, who's a professor of urban studies, I think he's originally from Johannesburg. He says this infrastructure is capable of facilitating the intersection of socialities so that expanded spaces of economic and cultural operation become available to residents of limited means. What does that mean? So who is this type of infrastructure for, do you think? Perhaps we could also call this informal infrastructure, non-regulated infrastructure, right? There's no government or large corporations sort of say, or there's no regulation, official regulations or rules that govern this type of infrastructure, but it's a different type of infrastructure. It's an infrastructure that becomes created out of need. It becomes created from something that is not officially provided, right? So the government, local regulations, they don't provide for certain things. So people have to become self-sufficient. They have to become, or they have to be inventive, and they have to come up with alternative ways of providing things for themselves. And
in,
sorry, go ahead.
And in several ways, the exercise of getting you guys to kind of talk about the water infrastructure in the places in which you come from or the places in which you lived, the Abdul Malik text is very much the antithesis to that, because as Demetra has kind of alluded to, it's not stuff that's explicitly necessary if you don't create these kind of social infrastructures. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people aren't going to die per se, but it's still infrastructure that we consider to be essential to the functioning of these cities. And in that respect, it's something very different to what you would, the rudimentary understanding of what people would think infrastructure is. Did everybody get the chance to read the text? Did you understand it? Did you disagree with it?
We have some good questions, actually. Last week we had really good questions as well, but it would be really nice to hear them from you guys because they are interesting and they show that you have engaged with the text, which makes me particularly happy. So one of your colleagues says, it says that different immigrant groups bring various skills and networks to Johannesburg. They go through a conjunction of activities, and this brings high mobile and provisional possibilities. But this city still looks unsuitable for people to live and work. So I wonder that this form could really help the city develop.
Do you recognize who wrote that question?
It's me. Yeah, I saw they said the human as the infrastructure could bring lots of resource to the city, but the city some not very good industry in this city, like people can laundry the money or sell some drugs. I think so. I want to know, is they really help develop the city?
Do you think that those things are antithetical to, well, let me start again. Do you think that those things stop development in the city? Like you took two examples there, like laundering money,
Yeah.
and the sale of illegal drugs.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is those two things are things that stop development.
Um,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah. But maybe it's not, because it can maybe can help then the local people and money. I don't know, but for the future, I think this is not good for the future. Yeah, future of city.
I'm going to be quite facetious, but what about places like London, for example? Because those two examples are very, very big examples of the amount of money that moves in the city in which I live.
Mm.
And so for me, I'm asking the question of how are these two places different from each other?
London is more good, better than the city.
What can you maybe be more specific as to why you think this?
I think London have more money, and the government they have government could control the routes. Maybe in Africa, the government can't control the area.
What if it's people from the UK government that participate in this money laundering? Quote Pandora Papers.
Across the road.
So very often you'll find that, cities that we consider more quote unquote developed are also very, very much embedded in the global money laundering market. And, even when it comes to government officials, when it comes to people with high profiles, they are also, or can be, I'm not, making an overarching statement here, but they can be drug users, illegal drug users. They can be involved in illegal drug trade. They can be involved in illegal money laundering as well. It is true that certain mechanisms of infrastructural production and provision work differently, for example, in London than they do in Johannesburg. So in Johannesburg, you have this increased need for these informal networks in order for people to get what they need, right? In London, perhaps not so much, because you would have kind of local provision, local official provision would be kind of on a different level. than it is in Johannesburg. And here I'm making a speculation as someone who's never been to Johannesburg or doesn't know much about it beyond readings. But I can give an example from where I come from, where, yes, the lack of kind of government support and the lack of official infrastructures creates these informal networks. But then these informal networks also become a cultural part of the place. And they become just as valid and just as useful as official provision. What makes it difficult is that you have to be part of that network, or you have to find ways of making yourself known to that network and kind of, infiltrating into it to benefit from it. Because it usually tends to be that these informal networks are geared towards particular groups of people. And I'll give you another example. In New York City, there's the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, who's responsible for the subways, the buses. Is there a train? No, there's no train in New York. The buses and the subways, right? So they are responsible. They're the official body, public-private partnership, and official body of New York City, and responsible for transportation. However, New York City being so vast and, with a massive population and areas where buses are scarce, the subway perhaps doesn't go. So you have neighborhoods that are not served by public transit, or you have neighborhoods that have bad connections between them. So, for example, there's a Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, and then there's also a Chinatown in Queens, in sort of next to Jackson Heights. So that's kind of a neighborhood, a very, very multicultural, beautiful neighborhood in Queens. And in order to get from one to the other, it would take you an hour and a half by public transit. So what developed in New York City is a so-called dollar van. It's an unmapped, well, actually one scholar did a mapping of them, but it's officially an unmapped network of vans where people get in, they pay $1, and these vans move from one Chinatown to the other Chinatown, or from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, which kind of bypasses the official transport network. And they've become such an important part of the existing official network. They kind of, they add to that network, they add to that official network. They become another layer of New York City's infrastructure. And very often the drivers, they'll speak Mandarin. So, people who want to travel from one Chinatown to the other Chinatown and don't speak English, they can communicate with the driver and they can let them know where they want to go. So I feel like, these informal networks exist pretty much anywhere and everywhere, of course, at different levels, at different speeds, and at different sizes. But I think it's useful to recognize that they can be just as important as the official network is.
I think that's the breadth of it, isn't it? Has anybody got any other observations? Any other comments or questions before we wrap up?
I would also like you guys to provide us with some feedback, if you can. So if there's something that you would like us to do differently in these seminars, if there's something specific that you enjoy about these seminars, something that you think is less useful, comments on the types of readings or kind of the structure of the seminar, please do tell us. We want this experience to be as useful and enjoyable for you as possible. I mean, this is for you guys to learn and for you guys to engage with these topics, and to be able to use this information for your studio projects as well as for your dissertations. So if you can, please do give us, I don't know, you can write on Moodle. I can create like a little feedback page on Moodle where you can give us feedback. Please don't be afraid to be critical. We're not, we're not here to punish anybody or to criticize anybody. We 100% accept any feedback that we can get.
And anything just to make this more of a two-way thing, really. If you think that there's something that we can do that can make it more interactive, that there's a certain avenue that you want to kind of go down, then put it forward and obviously we'll consider it.
Yeah.
But thank you for everybody that participated today. And hopefully those that didn't, you'll participate next week. Yeah, and we'll see you in a week. And obviously we are open to kind of emails and stuff. So if there's something wrong with one of the readings, something you don't quite understand, send us an email. If not, please upload your questions by Monday evening next week, so we have time to kind of look at them and consider them before our session. Thank you again for all those who did upload questions. I don't know, is there anything else to add, Demetra?
I think we covered it.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. See you next
See you
week.
next week.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.